Once she was just a nurse who saved a stranger's life. Now Emily Chen must decide if the love growing between them is real or built on the wealthy businessman's deception. Fate brought a billionaire CEO to her doorstep, injured and vulnerable. But when Thomas Reynolds pretends to be poor to win her heart, can true love survive the weight of his lies and the worlds that separate them? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light streamed through the windows of Mercy General Hospital's emergency department, illuminating the organized chaos that Emily Chen had come to love over her 6 years as a trauma nurse. At 32, Emily had seen it all, or so she thought. Car accidents, gunshot wounds, heart attacks, and everything in between. Her calm efficiency and genuine compassion had earned her the respect of doctors and patients alike. "Another double shift, Emily?" Dr. Patel asked, noting the slight shadows under her eyes as she prepared medications for her next patient. Emily smiled, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "The rent in this city isn't going to pay itself, and my student loans certainly aren't disappearing anytime soon." It was a familiar refrain among the nursing staff. Despite their critical role in saving lives, the financial realities of living in San Francisco on a nurse's salary meant most of them worked overtime just to make ends meet. Emily had been saving for years, hoping to eventually put a down payment on a small apartment instead of watching her hard-earned money disappear into her landlord's pocket each month. "You should take some time for yourself," Dr. Patel suggested, concern evident in her voice. "When was the last time you went on a date or even took a day off?" Emily laughed, though there was little humor in it. "Between 70-hour work weeks and sleep, there's not much time for romance. Besides, the last guy the first dated couldn't understand why I couldn't just reschedule when a trauma came in during dinner." The truth was, Emily's devotion to her patients often came at the expense of her personal life. Her last serious relationship had ended 2 years ago, and since then she'd found it easier to pour herself into her work than to navigate the complicated world of dating. As her shift ended at 7 p.m., Emily gathered her things, looking forward to a rare evening off. The spring air felt refreshing after 12 hours in the sterile hospital environment. She decided to walk the 15 blocks to her apartment, enjoying the freedom of movement after being on her feet all day in a different way. Emily took a shortcut through Pacific Heights, a wealthy neighborhood with beautiful Victorian houses that she admired from afar. The disparity between this area and her own modest apartment in the Mission District was stark, another reminder of the economic divide that defined the city. As she turned onto a quieter residential street, Emily noticed a commotion ahead. A man was sprawled on the sidewalk, clutching his leg, his face contorted in pain. Without hesitation, Emily rushed forward, her nursing instincts kicking in immediately. "Sir, I'm a nurse. Can you tell me what happened?" she asked, kneeling beside him, automatically checking his pulse and assessing his condition. The man looked up, pain evident in his startlingly blue eyes. "I was jogging, and my knee just gave out. I think I twisted it badly when I fell." Emily noted his expensive running shoes, now scuffed from the fall, and the high-quality athletic wear that suggested he was likely a resident of this affluent neighborhood. He appeared to be in his late 30s, with dark hair graying slightly at the temples, and a face that, despite being twisted in pain, possessed a rugged handsomeness. "I'm Emily," she said, gently examining his knee, which was already swelling visibly. "And you are?" "Thomas," he replied through gritted teeth. "Thomas Reynolds." The name meant nothing to Emily, but unknown to her, she was tending to Thomas Reynolds, the reclusive CEO of Reynolds Technologies, one of the largest tech companies in the country. Worth billions, Thomas was rarely photographed and preferred to keep his private life out of the media spotlight, allowing him to jog through the neighborhood near his mansion without being recognized. "Well, Thomas, it looks like you've sprained your knee pretty badly. You should get it properly examined, but first we need to get you off the street. Do you live nearby?" Emily asked, helping him to sit up. Thomas hesitated, his mind racing. Something about this woman's genuine concern touched him. In his world of corporate power plays and strategic relationships, authenticity was rare. People always wanted something from him: money, connections, status, but this woman had no idea who he was. She was helping him simply because he needed help. In that split second, Thomas made a decision that would change both their lives. "Actually, I was just visiting a friend in the area," he lied smoothly. "I live across town. much less fancy neighborhood. Emily nodded, not questioning his story. Do you have someone you can call to help you get home? Thomas shook his head. My phone battery died during my run. We should get you to urgent care then, Emily suggested, already looking around for a taxi. No hospitals, Thomas said quickly, surprising himself with his vehemence. The truth was, he dreaded the special treatment and attention he would inevitably receive once his identity was discovered. I don't have insurance right now, he added, the lie coming easier than he expected. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emily's expression softened with understanding. I see. Well, at the very least, you need ice and elevation. My apartment isn't far from here. I can help you there, wrap your knee properly, and then figure out how to get you home safely. Thomas knew he should decline, call his driver, and have his personal physician attend to him at his mansion. But something about this woman, her kindness without agenda, her competence, the way she looked at him as just another person in need, made him reluctant to end their encounter. That's very kind of you, he said, allowing her to help him stand, wincing authentically at the pain that shot through his knee. Together they made slow progress, with Thomas leaning heavily on Emily for support. He was struck by how strong she was for her small frame, another testament to the physical demands of her job. So, what do you do, Thomas? Emily asked as they walked, partly to distract him from the pain and partly out of genuine curiosity. Another moment of decision. I work in tech, he said, which wasn't a lie. Software development. That part was. Thomas hadn't personally coded in years, though he had started his company writing code in his college dorm room. That explains why you're running in Pacific Heights in the middle of a workday, Emily said with a smile. Tech companies and their flexible schedules. Thomas laughed, surprised by how good it felt to have a normal conversation. Something like that. And you're a nurse at... Mercy General! Trauma department. That must be intense, Thomas said, genuinely interested. It is, but I love it. Every day is different, and I get to help people when they need it most. The passion in her voice was unmistakable. By the time they reached Emily's apartment building, a modest structure that had seen better days, Thomas had learned that Emily had wanted to be a nurse since she was 10 years old, that she'd moved to San Francisco from Portland 5 years ago, and that she lived alone except for a cat named Hippocrates. Emily's third-floor walk-up posed a challenge with Thomas's injured knee, but they managed it together, laughing at their awkward progress up the narrow stairwell. Her apartment was small but neat, with simple, functional furniture and walls adorned with framed photos of what Thomas assumed were family and friends. It was a stark contrast to his 10,000-square-foot mansion with its curated art collection and designer furniture. Make yourself comfortable, Emily said, helping him to her worn but clean sofa. I'll get some ice for that knee. As she moved around her kitchen, Thomas took in the details of her life. Medical textbooks stacked on a small desk, a calendar filled with shift notations, a collection of coffee mugs with nursing humor. This was a life lived with purpose but within modest means, so different from his own existence of luxury and power. Emily returned with ice, pain relievers, and an elastic bandage. With practiced efficiency, she elevated his leg on a pillow, applied the ice pack, and handed him 2 pills. Just ibuprofen, she assured him. It will help with the swelling and pain. As she carefully wrapped his knee, Thomas found himself studying her face. The concentration in her dark eyes, the gentle determination in her expression. When was the last time someone had cared for him without an ulterior motive? You're very good at this, he said softly. Emily smiled without looking up from her work. I should hope so. I do this for a living, remember? No, I mean... Thomas hesitated. Taking care of strangers. Going above and beyond. Now she did look up, her eyes meeting his. You're not a stranger anymore, Thomas. And helping people isn't about doing the minimum required. It's about treating others the way you'd want to be treated if you were vulnerable and in pain. Her words struck him deeply. In his world of corporate takeovers and billion-dollar decisions, vulnerability was seen as weakness, and pain was something to be hidden, not acknowledged. Thank you, he said simply, meaning it more than she could know. After making sure his knee was properly wrapped, Emily insisted on making them both dinner, a simple pasta dish that she apologized for, even as Thomas found it more satisfying than meals he'd eaten at five-star restaurants. "So where exactly do you live?" Emily asked as they ate at her small kitchen table. "I should probably help you figure out how to get home." Thomas thought quickly. "Lower Knob Hill," he said, naming a neighborhood that was neither too affluent nor too modest. "But don't worry about it, I can call a rideshare." "On your dead phone?" Emily raised an eyebrow, amused. "Right," Thomas laughed. "Can I borrow yours?" Emily handed him her phone, and Thomas pretended to call a ride while actually texting his assistant, Marcus. "Need pickup at this address. Coming alone. We'll explain later. Keep this confidential." He added the address and returned the phone to Emily with a smile. "All set. They'll be here in about 30 minutes. As they waited, their conversation flowed easily. Thomas found himself sharing stories from his college days, carefully edited to remove references to his eventual success, while Emily told him about particularly memorable patients and the challenges of working in a busy trauma center. "The hardest part isn't the blood or the technical aspects," she explained, her expression growing serious. "It's seeing people at their most vulnerable, and knowing that sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you can't save everyone." "How do you cope with that?" Thomas asked, genuinely curious. Emily considered the question. "By remembering the ones we do save, by treating each person with dignity, regardless of the outcome, and by acknowledging that medicine has limits, but compassion doesn't." Thomas felt something shift inside him. In his corporate world, limits were seen as challenges to be overcome through money, power, or innovation. The idea of accepting certain limitations while still giving your all was foreign to him, and strangely compelling. When his phone allegedly notified him that his ride was arriving, Thomas felt a surprising reluctance to leave. "Let me help you downstairs," Emily offered, already standing. "You've done more than enough," Thomas protested, but she was already gathering her keys. "Humor me. It's the nurse in me. I need to see the patient safely transferred to the next caregiver." Outside, a nondescript black car waited at the curb. Marcus had understood the need for discretion. Thomas turned to Emily, suddenly uncertain how to end their encounter. "Thank you again," he said, "for everything." "It was no trouble," Emily replied with a warm smile. "Make sure you follow up with a doctor if the pain doesn't improve in a few days." Thomas nodded, then, acting on impulse, asked, "Could I take you to dinner sometime? To properly thank you?" Emily looked surprised, then pleased. "I'd like that. Let me give you my number. For real this time, not just for ride-sharing apps." They exchanged numbers, and Thomas promised to call her soon. As he settled into the back seat of the car, and it pulled away, he saw Emily waving from the curb, a simple gesture that somehow meant more to him than the standing ovations he received at shareholder meetings. "Home, sir?" Marcus asked from the driver's seat, carefully neutral despite the unusual circumstances. "Yes," Thomas replied, his mind already racing with thoughts of Emily. "And, Marcus, I need your complete discretion about today." "Of course, sir." Back at his sprawling mansion in the exclusive Seacliff neighborhood, Thomas's personal physician confirmed what Emily had already told him, a moderate knee sprain that would heal with rest, ice, compression, and elevation. Later that night, as Thomas lay in his king-sized bed, surrounded by luxury yet feeling strangely empty, he kept replaying his interactions with Emily. Her kindness, her authenticity, her simple yet purposeful life had affected him deeply. He picked up his phone and typed a message. "Thank you again for your help today. Would you be free for dinner this Friday?" Emily's response came quickly. "You're welcome. Friday works. I'm off at 7. Nothing fancy, though. I mean it." Thomas smiled at her directness. Nothing fancy, he promised, already planning to maintain his charade as a moderately successful software developer rather than the billionaire CEO he truly was. What had started as a split-second decision to conceal his identity was now becoming a deliberate deception. Thomas justified it to himself. He wanted Emily to know him as a person, not as a fortune or a corporate entity. He wanted to experience the authenticity he'd glimpsed in their brief encounter. Just for a little while, he wanted to be valued for himself, not his wealth or power. What harm could it do to maintain the pretense for one dinner? He reasoned. If things didn't progress between them, no one would be hurt. And if they did, well, he would cross that bridge when he came to it. As he drifted off to sleep, Thomas couldn't remember the last time he'd looked forward to a simple dinner with such anticipation. In his world of business acquisitions and technological innovations, he had forgotten the basic human pleasure of connecting with another person without agenda or pretense. Meanwhile, across the city in her small apartment, Emily was having similar thoughts. There had been something about Thomas that intrigued her, a depth behind his eyes, a quality she couldn't quite name. Despite her packed schedule and the voice of caution in her head warning her about getting involved with someone new, she found herself looking forward to Friday with unexpected eagerness. Neither of them could have predicted how their lives would intertwine in the coming weeks, or how Thomas's well-intentioned deception would grow more complicated with each passing day. For now, they were simply two people who had connected in an unexpected moment of vulnerability, one that would lead them both on a journey neither could have anticipated. As Friday approached, Thomas found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, feeling nervous about a date. His usual confidence, born from years of commanding boardrooms and negotiating billion-dollar deals, seemed to desert him when he thought about seeing Emily again. What had started as a spontaneous lie was now requiring careful planning. He had Marcus research mid-range restaurants that would be nice but not suspiciously expensive. He selected clothes that were high quality but not obviously designer, items from his casual wardrobe that wouldn't raise eyebrows. He even practiced talking about a fictional apartment and job responsibilities that would align with his cover story. For the first time in his adult life, Thomas Reynolds was strategizing not how to acquire a company or outmaneuver a competitor, but how to appear ordinary, and the stakes felt higher than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. Friday evening arrived with unusual anticipation for both Emily and Thomas. For her part, Emily had spent more time than she cared to admit selecting an outfit, settling on a simple blue dress that she hadn't worn in months. It wasn't fancy, but it was a welcome change from her hospital scrubs. Thomas arrived at her apartment building precisely at 7, driving a modest sedan he had borrowed from his company's fleet rather than any of his luxury vehicles. He had taken extra care to choose a watch that looked expensive enough to be a splurge for a successful software developer, but nowhere near the collection of timepieces he actually owned, each worth more than most people's annual salary. When Emily opened her door, Thomas felt a genuine smile spread across his face. Away from the hospital setting and not in pain, he could fully appreciate how beautiful she was, her dark hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders, her eyes bright with anticipation. "You look amazing," he said honestly. Emily blushed slightly. "Thanks. You clean up pretty well yourself, especially without the grimace of pain." As they walked to his car, Thomas was careful to move normally. Though his knee was still somewhat tender, the last thing he needed was for Emily to suspect he'd been exaggerating his injury. "So where are we going?" Emily asked as they drove through the city. "A little place in the Mission called Mariposa," Thomas replied. "Great food, not too formal. I thought you might appreciate staying in your neighborhood." Emily looked surprised. "How did you know I live in the Mission?" Thomas silently cursed his slip. He'd had Marcus research everything about her, including her neighborhood. "You mentioned it when we were talking about the city the other day, didn't you?" Emily seemed to accept this explanation, and Thomas made a mental note to be more careful. Maintaining his cover story was proving more complicated than he'd anticipated. Mariposa was exactly what Thomas had hoped for. Intimate without being pretentious, with excellent food that wouldn't raise suspicions about how a mid-level software developer could afford it. They were seated at a corner table that offered some privacy, and Thomas noticed with satisfaction that Emily seemed comfortable in the setting. "So tell me more about your work," Emily said after they had ordered. "What kind of software do you develop?" Thomas was prepared for this. "I work for a smaller company called TechSphere. We develop back-end systems for healthcare applications, actually. Nothing glamorous, but it's satisfying knowing our work helps medical professionals." It wasn't entirely a lie. Reynolds Technologies did have a healthcare division, though it was just one small part of his vast corporate empire. "That's actually really interesting," Emily said, leaning forward. "We just got a new patient tracking system at the hospital, and let me tell you, there's definitely room for improvement." Thomas laughed. That's what I love about this field. There's always a problem to solve, always a way to make things better. This, at least, was completely true. His passion for innovation was genuine, even if the specifics of his job were fabricated. As they shared a bottle of wine and moved from appetizers to main courses, their conversation flowed naturally. Thomas found himself sharing stories from his college days, carefully edited to remove references to his eventual success, while Emily told him about particularly challenging cases and the satisfaction of seeing patients recover. "Last month, we had this teenager come in after a terrible car accident," she said, her eyes bright with emotion. "The trauma team worked for hours, and honestly, there were moments I wasn't sure he would make it. But yesterday, he walked into the ER on his own 2 feet to thank us. That's why I do what I do. For moments like that." Thomas was struck by the passion in her voice. "You really love your work, don't you?" "I do," Emily nodded. "Even on the hardest days, I never doubt that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." How many people can say that? Not many, Thomas thought, though he had once felt that way about his own work. In the early days of building his company, he had been driven by the pure joy of creation, of solving problems and building something meaningful. Somewhere along the way, as Reynolds Technologies grew into a behemoth, that simple pleasure had been buried under shareholder expectations, competitive pressures, and the isolating effects of extreme wealth. "You're lucky," he said sincerely, "to have such clarity about your purpose." Emily studied his face. "You say that like you don't feel the same way about your work." Thomas hesitated. "I love what I do," he said carefully. "But sometimes I wonder if I've become too caught up in the details and lost sight of the bigger picture, why I started in the first place." It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd said all evening. Emily reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. "Maybe you need to reconnect with that initial spark. Remember what drew you to technology in the first place." Her simple wisdom and the warmth of her touch affected Thomas more deeply than he expected. When was the last time someone had shown genuine concern for his fulfillment rather than his productivity or profitability? After dinner, neither of them seemed ready for the evening to end. They decided to walk to a nearby park, where they sat on a bench under the stars, continuing their conversation as the city hummed around them. "Tell me about your family," Emily said. "Are they in San Francisco too?" Thomas shook his head. "My parents are both gone. Dad had a heart attack when I was in college, and Mom passed from cancer about 5 years ago. No siblings." This part at least was true, though he omitted that his mother's cancer treatment had inspired him to invest billions in medical research through the Reynolds Foundation. "I'm sorry," Emily said softly. "That must be lonely sometimes." Thomas nodded, surprised by how perceptive she was. Despite his success and the constant company of executives, assistants, and business associates, loneliness had become his most faithful companion. "What about you?" he asked, eager to shift the focus. "My parents still live in Portland. Dad's a high school teacher. Mom's a librarian. I have an older brother who's a firefighter in Seattle." "Very practical, service-oriented family," she said with a smile. "They must be proud of you," Thomas said. Emily laughed. "They are, though they worry I work too hard. My mom keeps trying to set me up with her friends' sons to make sure I have a life outside the hospital." "And do you?" "Have a life outside the hospital, I mean." "I'm sitting in a park with you at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, aren't I?" Emily countered with a smile. "But honestly, not as much as I probably should. The work is demanding, and by the time I get home, I usually just want to curl up with Hippocrates and sleep." "Hippocrates? Your cat, right? Named after the father of medicine?" Emily looked pleased that he remembered. "Exactly. He's very dignified for a cat. Suits his name." As the night grew cooler, Thomas reluctantly acknowledged it was time to take Emily home. At her door, there was a moment of awkwardness, both of them suddenly shy, despite the easy conversation they'd shared all evening. "I had a wonderful time," Emily said, her keys jingling in her hand. "So did I," Thomas replied, meaning it more than she could know. "Could I see you again?" Emily's smile was answer enough, but she nodded. I'd like that. I'm off next Wednesday evening. Wednesday it is, Thomas said, and before he could overthink it, he leaned forward and kissed her cheek, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and perfect for the moment. As he drove back to his mansion in Seacliff, Thomas felt lighter than he had in years. For a few hours, he had been just Thomas. Not Thomas Reynolds, CEO and billionaire. Not the man whose decisions affected thousands of employees and millions of consumers. Just a man enjoying the company of a woman who saw him, not his wealth or position. But even as he savored the evening, a nagging voice reminded him that he was building something meaningful on a foundation of deception. The longer he maintained the charade, the more difficult it would eventually be to tell Emily the truth. Yet he pushed these concerns aside. Surely there would be time later to reveal his true identity, once Emily knew him well enough that his wealth wouldn't define him in her eyes. For now he wanted to preserve the authenticity of their connection, the rare pleasure of being valued for himself alone. Over the next few weeks, Thomas and Emily saw each other whenever her demanding schedule allowed. He took her to art exhibits at small galleries, to indie film screenings, to hole-in-the-wall restaurants with amazing food, all places that wouldn't strain the budget of the moderately successful professional he was pretending to be. Each date required careful planning. Thomas had to research places that wouldn't recognize him, wear clothes that wouldn't reveal his wealth, and constantly monitor his speech for references to his actual life. It was exhausting, but exhilarating, like a high-stakes game where the prize was Emily's genuine affection. For her part, Emily found herself increasingly drawn to Thomas. There was a depth to him that she hadn't expected, a thoughtfulness behind his sometimes awkward attempts to relate to her world. She noticed how he listened intently when she spoke about her patients, how he remembered small details about her preferences, how his eyes lit up when she entered the room. One evening, about a month into their relationship, they were cooking dinner together at Emily's apartment, something that had become a regular activity. Thomas had discovered a surprising enjoyment in these domestic tasks that his chef usually handled at home. "Can you pass the oregano?" Emily asked, stirring a pot of sauce on her small stove. Thomas opened her spice cabinet and froze. There, among the alphabetically arranged bottles, was a prescription medication with his company's logo prominently displayed. Reynolds Pharmaceuticals had recently developed a groundbreaking treatment for autoimmune disorders, and apparently, Emily was taking it. "Thomas, the oregano?" He quickly grabbed the herb and handed it to her, his mind racing. Was Emily sick? The medication was specifically for severe cases of lupus, a condition that could be debilitating if not properly managed. Throughout dinner, Thomas tried to focus on their conversation, but the image of that prescription bottle kept intruding. If Emily was dealing with a serious health condition, why hadn't she mentioned it? And more troublingly, the treatment was expensive, prohibitively so for many patients without excellent insurance. How was she affording it on a nurse's salary? After they finished eating and were relaxing on her sofa, Thomas carefully approached the subject. "Emily, I noticed something in your cabinet earlier, a medication." He hesitated, not wanting to invade her privacy but genuinely concerned. "Are you okay?" Emily looked surprised, then slightly embarrassed. "Oh, you saw that. I'm fine, really. I have lupus, but it's well controlled with the medication." "Why didn't you tell me?" Thomas asked gently. Emily shrugged. "It's not something I usually bring up right away. It's part of my life, but it doesn't define me. I didn't want you to see me as fragile or sick." Thomas understood that impulse all too well, the desire to be known for who you are rather than for a single aspect of your identity. "I would never see you that way," he assured her. "But I care about you. I want to know what's going on in your life. All of it." Emily smiled, touched by his concern. "It's been stable for years. I was diagnosed in nursing school, which was ironic, learning to care for others while coming to terms with my own chronic condition." Thomas nodded, but a question still nagged at him. "That medication, it's pretty new, isn't it? And—" He hesitated, not wanting to appear too knowledgeable. "I've heard it's expensive." "It is," Emily admitted. "I'm actually part of a patient assistance program run by the company that makes it." Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. She shook her head in wonder. "Without their program, I could never afford it." My insurance covers part, but it would still be thousands out of pocket every month. Thomas felt a surge of pride, followed immediately by guilt. The patient assistance program had been his initiative, pushed through despite resistance from his board, who had argued it would cut too deeply into profits. Hearing firsthand how it had helped Emily validated his decision, but it also underscored the deception he was maintaining. "That's remarkable," he managed. "That they would do that." Emily nodded. "It is. People love to vilify pharmaceutical companies, and sometimes with good reason, but programs like this make a real difference. I wouldn't be able to work, maybe even to function normally, without this medication." Thomas wanted desperately to tell her then, to reveal that he was responsible for the very program that was helping her live her life, but he held back, afraid that the truth would change everything between them. "I'm glad you have access to what you need," he said simply, taking her hand. Emily squeezed his fingers. "Me too. And thank you for not making a big deal about it. Some people get weird when they find out. Start treating me differently." "I would never do that," Thomas promised, even as he recognized the irony of his assurance. Wasn't he asking her to treat him differently by concealing his true identity? As their relationship deepened over the following weeks, Thomas found himself increasingly torn. On one hand, he had never been happier. Emily brought joy, perspective, and authenticity into his life, qualities that had been sorely lacking. She challenged him intellectually, made him laugh, and showed him a world beyond the rarefied atmosphere of extreme wealth. On the other hand, the web of lies was growing more complex and harder to maintain. He had created a fictional apartment that he could never invite her to, fabricated colleagues and projects that didn't exist, and lived in constant fear of being recognized when they were out together. The situation came to a head when Emily invited Thomas to her hospital's annual fundraising gala. "It's nothing too fancy," she assured him as they walked through Golden Gate Park one Saturday afternoon. "But it's for a good cause, raising money for the children's wing. Everyone brings a date, and I'd love for you to meet my friends from work." Thomas felt a knot form in his stomach. A hospital fundraiser would almost certainly include wealthy donors from San Francisco society, people who would recognize him instantly. "When is it?" he asked, playing for time. "Next Friday. I know it's short notice, but one of the other nurses just broke up with her boyfriend, so there's an extra ticket." Emily looked at him hopefully. It would mean a lot to have you there. Thomas desperately wanted to say yes to support Emily and meet the people who were important to her, but the risk of exposure was too great. "I'd love to, but I'm afraid I have a work commitment that night," he lied, hating himself for the disappointment that flashed across her face. "A client meeting that's been scheduled for months. I can't get out of it." Emily nodded, clearly trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course, I understand. Work comes first sometimes." Her gracious acceptance only made Thomas feel worse. Here was Emily, working exhausting shifts, saving lives while managing a chronic illness, and she had never once canceled on him because of work. Meanwhile, he was fabricating excuses to avoid a simple fundraiser. Later that night, alone in his mansion, Thomas paced his vast living room, wrestling with his conscience. What had started as a spontaneous lie had grown into a situation that was becoming untenable. He was falling in love with Emily. He could admit that to himself now. But their relationship was founded on a fundamental dishonesty. If he told her the truth now, would she understand? Or would she see the deception as an unforgivable breach of trust? And if she did forgive him, would things change between them once she knew about his wealth and position? Thomas had spent his adult life making difficult decisions, weighing risks and benefits, analyzing probable outcomes. But none of his business acumen seemed applicable to this situation where his heart, not his company, was on the line. The following Monday, Thomas was sitting in his office at Reynolds Technologies headquarters, ostensibly reviewing quarterly projections but actually thinking about Emily, when his assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Reynolds, the board is waiting in the conference room for your presentation on the new healthcare initiative." Thomas nodded, gathering his materials. The healthcare initiative was his latest passion project, a plan to make Reynolds' most critical medications more accessible to patients regardless of income or insurance status. It would cost the company millions, but potentially help thousands of patients like Emily. As he walked into the boardroom, Thomas was greeted by the familiar faces of his executive team and board members, men and women in expensive suits who controlled billions in capital and made decisions affecting countless lives. "Before we begin," said Emily Chen, his most vocal board member, "I'd like to express some concerns about the scope of this initiative. The projected impact on our bottom line is significant." Thomas took a deep breath. "The impact on our bottom line is precisely the point, Vivian. We've been focusing too narrowly on quarterly profits and not enough on our original mission to improve lives through innovation." "That's very altruistic," replied another board member dryly, "but we have a responsibility to our shareholders." "And to the patients who need our medications," Thomas countered. "What good is developing life-changing treatments if the people who need them most can't access them?" As the debate continued, Thomas found himself thinking of Emily, of her dedication to her patients, of her matter-of-fact acceptance of her own condition, of the difference his company's patient assistance program had made in her life. Without realizing it, she had reignited his sense of purpose, reminding him why he had started Reynolds Technologies in the first place. By the end of the meeting, Thomas had secured reluctant approval for his initiative, though at a somewhat reduced scale. It was a victory, but one that left him feeling hollow as he returned to his office. He had just fought to expand a program that helped people like Emily, yet he couldn't even share that accomplishment with her because of the lie he was living. That evening, as Thomas prepared to meet Emily for dinner, he made a decision. The deception had gone on long enough. Tonight he would tell her the truth, whatever the consequences. He owed her that much, and he owed it to himself to find out if what they had built together could survive complete honesty. Thomas arrived at the small Italian restaurant they had chosen for dinner that evening with his heart pounding uncomfortably in his chest. He had changed his outfit 3 times before settling on a simple button-down shirt and slacks, clothing that represented a middle ground between the casual attire of his software developer persona and the bespoke suits he typically wore as CEO. Emily was already waiting at their table, looking beautiful in a simple green dress that brought out the warmth in her eyes. When she smiled at him, Thomas felt a wave of both affection and anxiety wash over him. "You look beautiful," he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek before taking his seat. "Thanks," Emily replied. "You seem tense. Rough day at work?" Even after just 2 months of dating, she could read his moods with remarkable accuracy. It was one of the many things he loved about her, her attentiveness, her genuine interest in his thoughts and feelings. No one in his business world ever asked how he was doing and actually waited for a real answer. "Something like that," Thomas said, taking a sip of water. "Actually, there's something important I need to talk to you about." Emily's expression immediately shifted to concern. "That sounds serious. Is everything okay?" Thomas took a deep breath. "Emily, I haven't been completely honest with you." Her face paled slightly, and Thomas hurried to continue before she jumped to the worst conclusions. "It's not what you might be thinking. I haven't lied about my feelings for you, or about being single, or anything like that. But I haven't told you the whole truth about myself." Emily's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Before Thomas could respond, a waiter approached their table with a bottle of wine. "Compliments of the chef, Mr. Reynolds. He was honored to hear you were dining with us tonight." Thomas closed his eyes briefly, wishing the floor would open up and swallow him. Of all the restaurants in San Francisco, he had to choose one where the chef recognized him. It was exactly the scenario he'd been trying to avoid for 2 months. "Mr. Reynolds?" Emily repeated, looking between Thomas and the waiter in confusion. The waiter, sensing the tension, quickly poured the wine and retreated. Thomas forced himself to meet Emily's questioning gaze. "That's part of what I wanted to tell you," he said quietly. "My name is Thomas Reynolds. I'm the CEO of Reynolds Technologies." Emily stared at him, disbelief evident in her expression. "Reynolds Technologies? The pharmaceutical company?" Thomas nodded, watching as understanding dawned in her eyes. "The company that makes my medication," she said slowly. "The company worth billions." "That Reynolds Technologies?" "Yes," Thomas confirmed. "I was going to tell you tonight, I swear. I've been wanting to tell you for weeks. Emily sat back in her chair, her face a complex mixture of emotions Thomas couldn't fully decipher. I don't understand. Why would you lie about something like that? Thomas struggled to find the right words. That day when we met, when I fell jogging, it was the first time in years someone had helped me without knowing who I was or what I could do for them. You were just kind, without agenda. And when I realized you didn't recognize me, I made a split-second decision to keep it that way. For 2 months, Emily's voice had a hard edge he'd never heard before. You maintained this lie for 2 months? I know it sounds crazy, Thomas admitted, but the longer it went on, the harder it became to tell you the truth. I was afraid of how it would change things between us. Emily shook her head, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You know what's crazy? That you thought I would treat you differently because of your money. That you didn't trust me enough to just be honest. It wasn't about trust, Thomas tried to explain. In my world, Emily, everything is transactional. People want access, influence, funding. Nothing is simple or straightforward. But with you, for the first time in as long as I can remember, I was just a person. Not a wallet or a connection or a stepping stone to something else. So you lied to me for your own comfort, Emily said flatly. Did you ever stop to think how I would feel when I found out? Did you consider that you were taking away my choice, my right to decide for myself how to handle your wealth? Thomas hadn't thought of it that way, and the realization hit him hard. I'm sorry, he said, the words feeling woefully inadequate. You're right. I was selfish. I was so focused on protecting myself that I didn't think about how it would affect you. Emily took a sip of her wine, her hand trembling slightly. All those times you came to my tiny apartment, ate my simple cooking, listened to me worry about student loans and rent increases, while living in what? A mansion. Seacliff, Thomas admitted. But Emily, those evenings in your apartment were the most real, the most meaningful times I've had in years. Were they? Emily challenged. How can I know what was real and what was part of your act? The Thomas I thought I knew wouldn't maintain a deception like this. Her words cut deep because they contained a painful truth. Thomas had been playing a role, editing himself, presenting a version of his life that wasn't authentic. Even if his feelings for her were genuine, the foundation of their relationship was built on sand. I understand if you can't forgive this, Thomas said quietly. But please believe that my feelings for you are real, more real than anything in my life right now. Emily studied his face, and Thomas could see her professional detachment taking over, the same calm assessment she likely used when evaluating patients. I need time to think, she finally said. This is a lot to process. Of course, Thomas agreed quickly. Take all the time you need. I should go, Emily said, standing up and gathering her purse. Thomas rose as well, fighting the urge to reach for her, to physically prevent her from walking away. Let me at least drive you home, he offered. No, Emily shook her head firmly. I'll take a ride share. I need space right now, Thomas, or whatever your real name is. It is Thomas, he said softly. That part was always true. Emily nodded once, then turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Thomas standing alone at the table, aware of the curious glances from nearby diners who had witnessed their tense exchange. Back in his mansion that night, Thomas paced the expansive living room, replaying every moment of their disastrous dinner. How could he have handled it differently? Should he have told her the truth earlier? Or was the deception itself unforgivable, regardless of when he confessed? For the first time, Thomas truly understood the cost of his wealth, not in dollars, but in the barriers it created between himself and authentic human connection. The very success he had worked so hard to achieve had isolated him, surrounding him with people who valued what he could provide rather than who he was. Emily had been a bridge back to humanity, a reminder of what truly mattered. And now he might have lost her, because he couldn't trust that their connection was strong enough to withstand the truth about his life. 3 days passed with no word from Emily. Thomas respected her request for space, though it took every ounce of self-control not to call or text her. He went through the motions at work, attended meetings, made decisions, but his mind was elsewhere. On the 4th day, as Thomas sat in his office staring unseeing at budget projections, his assistant knocked on the door. Mr. Reynolds, there's someone here to see you. And Emily Chen? She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent. Thomas's heart leapt. Send her in right away. Moments later, Emily walked into his office, her expression unreadable as she took in the expansive space with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, the modernist furniture, the original artwork on the walls. "So this is the real you," she said, gesturing around the office. "Part of me," Thomas acknowledged, coming around from behind his desk, "but not the most important part." Emily crossed her arms. "I've been thinking a lot these past few days, about us, about trust, about what matters." "Anne?" Thomas hardly dared to hope. "And I'm still angry," Emily said honestly. "But I also miss you, the you I got to know over these past months, whether that was the real Thomas Reynolds or not." "It was," Thomas insisted. "Emily, everything about how I feel about you, the conversations we had, the connection between us, all of that was real. The only lies were about my circumstances, not about who I am." Emily sighed, moving to the window to look out at the view. "You know what really hurts? That you thought I would only value you for your money. That you believed I was that shallow." "That's not it," Thomas said, moving to stand beside her. "I never thought you were shallow. I was protecting myself, not from you specifically, but from what wealth does to relationships. It changes how people see you, how they act around you, what they expect from you, and I couldn't bear the thought of that happening with us." Emily turned to face him. "But don't you see? By making that decision for me, by not giving me the chance to prove I would treat you the same regardless of your bank account, you showed that you didn't really trust me." Thomas hadn't considered it from that angle before, and the realization was humbling. "You're right," he admitted. "I was so focused on not being judged for my wealth that I ended up judging you, assuming how you would react rather than giving you the chance to show me." Emily nodded, seemingly appreciating his understanding. "So where does that leave us?" "That depends," Thomas said carefully. "Do you think you could forgive me? Could we start over with complete honesty this time?" Emily was quiet for a long moment, and Thomas held his breath. "I don't think we can start over," she finally said. "Too much has happened. But maybe we can move forward, build something new on a foundation of truth." Relief flooded through Thomas. "I'd like that, very much. But I have conditions," Emily continued, her voice firm. "First, no more lies, not even small ones. Second, I need to know that you see me as an equal in this relationship, despite the financial imbalance. And third, I want to continue living my life the way I have been. I won't quit my job or change who I am just because you can afford to support me. I wouldn't want you to," Thomas assured her. "Your dedication to your work, your compassion for your patients, those are some of the things I admire most about you." Emily smiled slightly, the first softening of her expression since she'd arrived. "Good, because I'm not interested in being a billionaire's trophy girlfriend." "Never that," Thomas promised. "You're my equal in every way that matters, Emily. In fact, in many ways you're far better than I am. More grounded, more connected to what really matters in life." Emily's smile widened a fraction. "Well, at least you recognize that." The tension between them eased slightly, and Thomas dared to take her hand. "Will you let me show you my real life now? My home, my work, all of it?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. "I think that's important. If we're going to move forward, I need to understand all of who you are, not just the parts you think I'll approve of." That weekend, Thomas gave Emily a tour of his world, starting with his mansion in Seacliff. As they walked through the spacious rooms with their museum-quality art and spectacular views, Thomas felt oddly self-conscious, seeing his home through Emily's eyes for the first time. "It's beautiful," she said, running her hand along a marble countertop in the kitchen that was larger than her entire apartment. "But it doesn't feel very lived in." "It isn't really," Thomas admitted. "I spend most of my time at the office. This place is more of a showcase than a home." Emily nodded thoughtfully. "That explains why you seem so comfortable in my tiny apartment. You were actually more at home there than here." Thomas realized she was right. Your place feels like someone actually lives there. It has warmth, personality. This is just where I sleep and store my belongings. They moved on to his company headquarters, where Thomas showed her the laboratories where researchers developed new medications, including the one that helped manage her lupus. Emily was particularly moved by the letters from patients displayed in the main lobby, people whose lives had been changed by Reynolds Technologies treatments. "I had no idea," she said, reading one from a mother whose child had been saved by a Reynolds drug. "This is the real impact of your work. It's why I started the company," Thomas explained. "My mother's illness showed me how medical innovation could make the difference between suffering and quality of life. The money, the success, those were side effects, not the goal." Emily looked at him with new understanding. "You've done something meaningful here, Thomas. Created something that helps people like me live normal lives." Her words meant more to him than any business award or financial milestone ever had. Later, they visited the Reynolds Foundation offices, where Thomas showed Emily the various charitable initiatives his wealth supported, from medical research to education programs in underserved communities. "This is what wealth should be used for," Emily said as they reviewed the foundation's latest projects. "Making a difference in people's lives." "That was always the plan," Thomas said. "But somewhere along the way, I got caught up in the business side. The growth, the competition, the next big acquisition. I started to lose sight of the purpose behind it all." "Until you fell on a sidewalk and a bossy nurse took charge," Emily said with a smile. Thomas laughed. "Exactly. You reminded me of what matters, Emily, of why I built all this in the first place." As they drove back to his home that evening, Emily was quieter than usual, clearly processing everything she had seen and learned. "It's a lot to take in, isn't it?" Thomas asked gently. Emily nodded. "It's like discovering you're dating two different people. The Thomas I knew, the one who listened to my hospital stories and cooked pasta in my tiny kitchen, and this other Thomas who runs a multinational corporation and lives in a mansion with an art collection worth millions. They're both me," Thomas said. "The difference is, the Thomas you knew first is the one I want to be, the one that feels most authentic. The CEO, the billionaire. That's a role I play, not who I am at my core." Emily considered this. "But you can't separate them entirely. Your work, your wealth, they're part of your life, your responsibilities." "True," Thomas acknowledged, "and I don't want to pretend otherwise anymore. But I need you to know that the man you got to know these past months, that's the real me, even if the circumstances I presented weren't accurate." When they reached his home, Thomas prepared dinner for them, a simple meal similar to what they might have made in Emily's apartment. As they ate at the massive dining table that could seat 20, Emily laughed at the absurdity of it. "We look ridiculous," she said, gesturing to the vast expanse of polished wood between them. "Like two people in a scene from a movie about rich people." Thomas smiled. "We could eat in the kitchen instead, or on the floor, or build a fort out of sofa cushions. The point is, this is just stuff, Emily. None of it matters compared to what we've found together." Emily's expression grew serious. "But it does matter, Thomas. Not the material things themselves, but what they represent. The life you lead, the responsibilities you have, the power you wield. I need to be sure I can fit into that life without losing myself." "You won't," Thomas promised. "In fact, I'm counting on you to keep me grounded, to remind me of what's real when I get caught up in all of this." He gestured around them. "That's a lot of pressure to put on someone," Emily observed. "I don't mean it that way," Thomas clarified. "I just mean that you see the world, and me, with such clarity. Your perspective is invaluable." Emily smiled. "Well, I am pretty insightful." The joke broke the tension, and Thomas felt hope rising in his chest. They had a long way to go, but Emily was still here, still willing to try. "So where do we go from here?" he asked. Emily reached across the ridiculous expanse of table to take his hand. "Forward, together, but at our own pace, and with no more secrets between us." "I can work with that," Thomas said, squeezing her fingers gently. In the weeks that followed, they began the delicate process of rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of truth. Emily continued her work at the hospital, declining Thomas's offer to pay off her student loans or subsidize her rent. "I need to make my own way," she explained. "Not because I'm too proud to accept help, but because my independence is part of who I am." Thomas respected her decision, though it went against his instinct to solve problems with money. It was one of many adjustments as they navigated the reality of their different worlds. For his part, Thomas made changes too. He restructured his work schedule to create more balance in his life, delegating responsibilities he had previously insisted on handling personally. He involved Emily in decisions about the Reynolds Foundation, valuing her perspective on which initiatives would have the most meaningful impact. Most significantly, he began to reevaluate his relationship with wealth itself, questioning whether the trappings of extreme affluence were enhancing his life or merely complicating it. 3 months after his confession, Thomas surprised Emily by taking her to see a property he was considering purchasing. A modest but beautiful house near Golden Gate Park with a garden and plenty of natural light. "What do you think?" he asked as they toured the sun-filled rooms. "It's lovely," Emily said. "But isn't it a bit small for your taste?" Thomas shook his head. "It's not for me. At least, not just for me. I was hoping it might be for us." Eventually, Emily looked at him in surprise. "Are you asking me to move in with you?" Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.